Bethnal Archives File 077, The Truth About the Tooth Fairy. Your teeth are not yours. First thing you must understand is this. Your teeth do not belong to you. Not once they fall out. Not if you leave them beneath your pillow. Not if the thing that comes in the night decides you are worth more than a single coin. The story I'm about to tell you isn't folklore. It isn't a quaint childhood tradition wrapped in parental deception. It's a warning. Because something is still collecting. And sometimes it takes more than teeth. Good evening, dear listeners. Samuel here, your ever-curious archivist, broadcasting to you from beneath the streets of London, where the Bethnal Archives keep their silent watch over things left best unspoken. Tonight's case isn't an exorcism gone wrong, it isn't a vengeful ghost or a cursed relic. Tonight we're talking about something far more subtle. Something you welcomed into your home. Something you placed beneath your child's pillow. The Tooth Fairy. Now, before you roll your eyes, before you dismiss this as nothing more than an innocent childhood myth, let me tell you what I found buried in police records, in forgotten folklore, in the hushed confessions of those who lost more than a milk tooth to the thing that came in the dark. Because, dear listeners, if the Tooth Fairy was a harmless invention, it isn't anymore. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Effigies in the Oaks. Our story starts not with a child, but with a tree surgeon. His name was Graham Pritchard, and in late autumn he was called to Epping Forest to examine an ancient oak that had begun to hollow from the inside out. It was a strange case. The tree was alive, its leaves still rich and green, yet its core had rotten into a cavernous void. When Pritchard cut deeper, when his hands reached into that yawning hollow, he screamed. Because inside the tree, buried among the gnarled roots, were bones. Not animal. Human milk teeth. Hundreds of them threaded together. Tiny effigies, humanoid figures carefully assembled from bones and resin, bound with strands of hair and delicate knots of sinew. And carved into the inner bark, written in a language no modern tongue had spoken in centuries, was a name. Ossuria Mater, the Bone Mother. Now, this name, Ossuria Mater, had never appeared in any mainstream texts, nor fairy tales, no children's books, or no whispers in the nursery. Dig deep enough into the roots of ancient folklore, and you will find traces. The Bone Mother wasn't a fairy. She was a goddess, or at least something that was once worshipped as one. Old stories, ones predating written language, suggest she was a guardian of the liminal, that fragile space between childhood and adulthood, between the living and the dead. She did not protect children, she collected from them. And the creatures that served her, the things we've come to call tooth fairies, were not whimsical spirits. They were constructs, drones, things built from bone and ritual, imbued with a singular, unwavering purpose: to harvest. Here's where things take a darker turn, because early European superstitions, long before the sanitized Victorian-era myth of a benevolent tooth fairy, warned of something else. They spoke of the first rule. A child's milk tooth must be given willingly. The act of offering a tooth was more than just a rite of passage. It was a contract. A trade ensuring that the child's soul would not be marked for collection. To withhold a tooth, this was an invitation to be taken instead. And if the offering was rejected, if the tooth fairy left the tooth untouched, then the child would vanish. The 19 missing children. I need you to follow me down a very particular rabbit hole now, because in combing through decades of missing persons reports, I found 19 cases spanning nearly a century, children who vanished from their locked bedrooms with no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no broken glass, and all of them had one thing in common. The night before they disappeared, they'd placed a tooth beneath their pillow, and by morning, the tooth was still there, uncollected, as though the offering had been refused, and in its place, the only clue left behind was a lingering, faint clicking sound like something with too many teeth was just chittering out of sight. Now we go on to the Sussex Hive. At this point, I had a theory. If all the tooth fairies were still active, still harvesting, then there had to be a place where they were, breeding, maybe a nest. And that's when I found this MI5 report. Buried in the classified files of the 1954 military operation, it detailed a covert operation into an abandoned chapel in the countryside of Sussex, one the locals had long avoided. And the reason? Well, they claimed the chapel hummed at night. When the MI5 agents entered the ruins, they found hanging husks, brittle cocoons of air and resin, containing dry, skeletal remains fused together with unnatural precision. And when they cracked one open, when the agent's torchlight fell upon what was inside, they saw rows of tiny skulls, their jaws packed with sharp, jagged teeth. Not human teeth. Fairy teeth. The nest was growing. And still is. If what I've uncovered is true, then the tooth fairies are no longer simply collecting. They are creating. Those bone effigies found in the hollowed oaks are not just relics, they are ritual objects. The milk teeth are being woven into new constructs, new fairies. And when a child's tooth is rejected, when they're taken instead, they're not merely vanishing, they're being repurposed, turned into something else. Right now, we're only scratching the surface. In this next part, we're going to talk about the bodies found beneath Deptford, the child who returned without teeth, and the camera footage that fractured reality itself. So let's continue to part 2, and the children that came back wrong. The child without teeth. 2 weeks after we uncovered the Sussex Hive, another case landed on my desk, one I wish I had never read. The Metropolitan Police had discovered 4 bodies beneath Deptford, deep in an abandoned underground tunnel sealed off since the 1950s. 3 of them were dead children, and 1 of them was still breathing. Her name, we can now reveal, is Emily Clark. She'd been missing for 6 months. She should have been dead. Instead, she was found curled in a recess of the tunnel, her skin grey and waxy, her body frail as though she had been hollowed out. She did not speak, she did not respond, until she opened her mouth. Her teeth were gone, not lost in decay or pulled by force. They'd simply never grown back. And in the empty spaces where her molars should have been, where her canines should have taken root, a faint clicking sound emerged, a sound that did not come from her lips or throat. It came from somewhere deeper. Emily was taken to a secure wing of St Thomas Hospital. I reached out to a contact in the Metropolitan Occult Unit, a specialist division that, as much as they deny it, has been dealing with cases like this for decades. They let me see the surveillance footage from Emily's hospital room. She lay in bed, unmoving, her breath slow, her gaze unfocused. The nurses came and went. The doctors checked her vitals. She remained unresponsive, but then, at 3:33 a.m, the camera feed fractured. Not static, not a glitch. The footage splinters, as if the lens itself could no longer comprehend what it was seeing. Shapes flickered in and out, impossible angles, figures shifting just outside of perception. And then, Emily was gone. The bed was empty, the sheets undisturbed. Only one thing remained, a single, perfect milk tooth, resting on the pillow. At this point, the truth was becoming undeniable. The tooth fairies, the real tooth fairies that is, were not collectors. They were constructs, And when a child's offering was refused, when the tooth fairy left a tooth behind, it meant something else had been decided. The child instead was being taken as raw material, to be reshaped, to be turned into something new. And whatever came back, whatever Emily Clark had started to become, was not human anymore. The nursery rhyme that wasn't. I spoke to an ethnographer, an expert in oral folklore. She listened to my findings with the cold detachment of someone who had heard too many things she could not afford to believe. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. You should look into the nursery rhyme. What nursery rhyme? I asked. She hesitated. Not one you'll find in a book. It's one of those things that passes between children, whispered in playgrounds. It surfaces every few generations, always slightly changed, always half forgotten. I asked her to recite it, and this is what she said. Under pillow, safe and sound, little tooth goes underground. Give it freely, give it true, or the child they take is you. Tiny fingers, tiny feet, milk-white bones and whispers sweet. Lay it down, don't make a peep, or the fairies crawl beneath your sheets. This rhyme, she explained, had no known origin, no documented source. It simply appears every few decades, whispered by children who have no way of knowing where it came from. And then it disappears again, erased, as if something does not want it to be remembered. The police report no one talks about. So after that I did some more digging, and I found something I was not meant to find. An unclassified police file, barely a paragraph long, dated 1976, concerning an incident at a children's home in East London. The report stated that 7 children had vanished from their dormitory in a single night. The staff, when questioned, had no memory of them ever existing, and only one thing remained: a pile of teeth stacked neatly in the centre of an empty dormitory. No bodies, no blood, just teeth. And once again, that faint clicking sound recorded on the police tape, but never explained. The case was marked unresolved. Then a month later the file was erased from the official records, but the Bethnal archives do not forget. This is where I leave you for now, for the tooth fairies are not a myth. They're not benevolent, and they're still working. Somewhere in the forgotten places of this world they are building something made of bone and whispering teeth. And when they come, when you hear that faint clicking noise behind your walls, know that it's already too late. In the final part of this investigation, we're going to uncover the Greenwich Park ritual and why the entire oak tree disappeared overnight. An infestation in Whitechapel, and an entire apartment block was found lined with tiny human teeth, and the entity that spoke through static, offering only 2 words to those who listen: not enough. Until then, prepare yourself, steel your body, and get ready for the final part of the story. And remember, if you're enjoying this, if you like the stories you hear on the Bethnal Archives, remember to like, subscribe and follow so we can ensure to make you stories every month. Chapter 14, The Greenwich Park Ritual, the tree that went missing. That's how this part of the story begins. Not cut down, not uprooted, just gone. At exactly 3:33 a.m, every CCTV feed in Greenwich Park corrupted for 23 seconds. When the footage returned, a 200-year-old oak tree near Queen's Field had vanished without a trace. No debris, no roots, no sign that it had ever been there at all. And only thing was left behind: a perfect circle of milk teeth pressed into the damp soil where the tree had stood, and buried among those teeth was a jawbone. A child's jawbone, carved with a symbol, the same symbol found in the hollowed out oak trees of Epping Forest, the mark of a Soria Mater. I didn't believe the reports at first, but an entire apartment block lined with human teeth in Whitechapel sounded ridiculous, urban legend nonsense, until I saw the photos. It started at flat 306. A man called Leon Carter called the council, complaining about something in his walls, a scraping noise, like insects. 2 days later, his bathroom mirror fell off the wall, and behind it, a cavity filled with tiny milk-white teeth. Each one fused into the plaster, arranged in tight, curling rows like a jaw that never ended. By the time the council arrived, it had spread. Every crack in the walls, every gap between the floorboards, every seam in the wallpaper lined with teeth, growing, shifting, as if the entire building was being turned into a mouth. And then we had the static and the voice. We traced 3 separate cases back to one thing, a sound, a faint hiss of static like an old radio left running, heard only in the deepest part of the night. 3 people, Leon Carter in Whitechapel, a park ranger in Greenwich, and a child in Deptford, all reported hearing it days before their disappearances. But only one person survived long enough to describe it. Margaret Ellis, the girl from 1986, the one who had returned after 3 years, her teeth regrowing into something unnatural. She knew the sound. She told her psychiatrist that if you listen long enough, if you let the static seep into your thoughts, the voice would speak. Only 2 words, not enough, and then the clicking would start. The final piece of the puzzle came into the archives last week. I received an anonymous package delivered directly here to the archives. Inside was a single reel of film, no label, no note, just 3 minutes and 30 seconds of grainy, silent footage. And what it showed, well, I have no rational way to explain. It was a forest, but not right at all. The trees were twisted, fused by something calcified and white, like roots made of bone. And within the tangled growth, small figures moved. They weren't children. Not anymore. They crawled hunched and jerking, their mouths stretched too wide, their limbs jutting at impossible angles. And at the centre of everything, half buried in the bone-wrapped roots, there was something vast, something humming, something growing. And then the film cut to black. But just before the reel ended, for the briefest moment I heard a faint clicking noise. And then a voice whispering, "Not enough." I have classified this as a Class 6 Fey construct hive entity, ritualistic collector, potential reality fracture agent. We're not dealing with a single creature. The Tooth Fairy is not one thing, it's a system, a hive, operating under rules so old that even we have forgotten them. But it's still active, still expanding, and does not simply take teeth, it builds with them. Somewhere out there, buried in the forests, in the ruins, in the cracks between our world and theirs, it is constructing something. And the whisper that lingers in the static, the warning left behind in every missing case, tells us one thing. They need more. This is my final word on the matter. Do not place your teeth under the pillow. Do not listen to the static. Do not ignore the clicking in your walls. If you wake in the night to find your old milk teeth left behind untouched, resting in their perfect little circle, run. Because that means the Tooth Fairies did not want them. They wanted you. And they're already inside, waiting. End of file 077. Report submitted by Samuel, Junior Archivist of the Bethnal Archives.